Today, I want to talk about a word that you may have heard a lot recently. That word, chronification. It's becoming the new buzzword in the migraine world. You might have seen it on social media, read it in an article, maybe your neurologist even mentioned it. Your migraines have become chronified. We need to prevent chronification. Chronification is why your migraines went from occasional to constant. And suddenly, everyone's talking about it like it's the answer, the explanation, the reason you're suffering. And here's the thing, they're not entirely wrong. Chronification is real, it's happening. But the way it's being talked about, the way it's being presented as this big, scary thing that explains everything, that's where things get a little bit messy. So today I want to break this down, what chronification actually is, why everyone's suddenly obsessed with it, and why focusing on this one word is keeping you stuck. So let's start with what chronification actually means. Because I think a lot of people, they hear this fancy medical term and they feel like they finally have an answer, a label, a diagnosis that validates what they've been experiencing. Chronification, it's simply the process by which episodic migraines become chronic migraines. That's it. You used to get migraines occasionally, maybe a few times a month, maybe even less, and over time, they became more frequent, more intense, more constant, until one day you realized you have more migraine days than non-migraine days. That process, that shift from occasional to constant, that's chronification. Medically speaking, chronic migraine is defined as 15 or more migraine days per month, headache days per month, they say, with at least 8 of those being migraine days for at least 3 months. So chronification is just the word for how you got there. If that's the case, why is everyone suddenly obsessed with the word? Well, because it sounds scientific. It sounds like an answer. For years, women with chronic migraines were dismissed, told it was stress, told it was hormones, told, just take more medication and deal with it. And then chronification comes along as this medical explanation. Your brain has changed. Your pain pathways have been altered. Your migraines have been chronified. It kind of feels validating, doesn't it? It feels like proof that something is real, is really happening, right? That you're not making this up. You're not just sensitive or dramatic. And that validation matters. I don't want to dismiss that. But here's where it goes sideways. Chronification becomes the answer, the explanation, the end of the conversation. Well, your migraines are just chronified now. That's just how it is, as if it's like permanent, as if there's nothing you can do about it, as if your brain is broken and you just have to accept it. And that's garbage. And I'm going to tell you why. We get so hung up on words and labels and titles. Chronification, chronic migraine, intractable migraine, medication overuse headache, central sensitization. We hear these words and we think, that's it. That's my diagnosis. That's what's wrong with me. That explains everything. And then we stop there. We accept this label. We accept the limitation. We accept that this is just who we are now. I have chronic migraines. They're chronified. My brain is different. This is my life. But here's what nobody tells you. Chronification is not the destination. It is a description of a process. It describes what happened. It doesn't explain why it happened. And more importantly, it doesn't mean that it can't be reversed. So let's simplify this because I think we overcomplicate everything. We throw around fancy medical terms. We make it sound so complex and so hopeless. But here's what chronification actually means in plain English. Your system, it got overwhelmed. And it stayed overwhelmed for so long that your brain started to expect the pain. That's it. Your nervous system got stuck in a pattern. Your pain pathways got reinforced. Your body learned that migraines were normal. It's not that your brain's broken. It's not that your brain adapted to a dysfunctional state. Pause. It's not that your brain is broken. It's that your brain adapted to a dysfunctional state. And anything that can be learned, it can be unlearned. Anything that adapted one direction can adapt back, but not if you just accept the label and stop there. Here's what frustrates me about how chronification is talked about. It puts all the focus on the brain, on the pain pathways, on the neurological changes. And yes, those changes are real. I'm not denying that. But what caused those changes? That's the question that nobody's asking. Your migraines didn't just randomly decide to become chronic one day. Your brain didn't wake up and think, you know what? Let's make this permanent. Something was driving it. Something was overwhelming your system. Something was keeping your body in a state of dysfunction long enough for chronification to happen. And that's what you need to address. Not just the chronification, you need to address the root cause of why it happened in the first place. This is where chronic systemic inflammation comes in. You have probably heard me talk about inflammation before, and I know it could be another buzzword, another label, but here's the difference. Chronification describes what happened to your migraines. Chronic systemic inflammation explains why it happened. When your body is dealing with ongoing inflammation from your gut, from toxins, from stress, from poor sleep, from blood sugar imbalances, hormone dysfunction, so on and so forth, that inflammation doesn't stay in one place. It circulates. It affects everything, including your brain. Your nervous system, it stays on high alert. Your pain pathways get activated over and over and over again. Your threshold for triggering a migraine, it gets lower and lower. And eventually, chronification happens. The migraines become constant because the inflammation never stopped. So when someone tells you your migraines have become chronified, that's not an answer. That's a symptom. The answer is what's driving the chronic inflammation that caused this. This is why the Freedom from Migraine method has 4 phases, because chronification, chronic migraines, whatever label you want to use, it's not a simple problem with a simple solution. You can't just take a pill and undo years of dysfunction. You can't just avoid your triggers and expect your brain to reset. You have to address the whole picture in the right order, which is why we have 4 phases that we follow. Phase 1, inflammatory inducers. They are the things actively creating inflammation in your body right now. Things like nutrition, hydration, electrolytes, sleep, stress, toxins, movement. This is where most people start. And sadly, this is where most people stop. They clean up their diet, they take some supplements, they feel a little better, but the migraines don't go away because the inducers are just the surface. They're the things poking your system every day. And yes, you need to address them. But if you only focus on phase 1, you're missing the deeper stuff. In phase 2, the chronic drivers, this is what's being quietly, it's been building for years, sometimes decades. Gut dysfunction, microbiome imbalances, hidden infections, hormones, especially in perimenopause and postmenopause, the fluctuation and imbalances that throw everything off. Autoimmune activity, your immune system creating inflammation from the inside. Maybe you have old injuries or structural issues, that whiplash from years ago that never fully healed. These are the things that keep inflammation alive, even when you're doing everything right on the surface. When you're doing all of phase 1 that you think is perfect, right? This is why you can't move forward, Because you can eat perfectly, sleep perfectly, manage your stress perfectly. But if your gut's a mess, if your hormones are tanking, if there's dysfunction you don't even know about, the inflammation continues and chronification continues. And then if needed, there's phase three, which is the genetics, right? This is where we look at your blueprint. Not to blame your genes. We're not going to go home and yell at your mom or your dad or your grandmother, right? And it's not to say, well, migraines run in my family, so I'm stuck. It's not how it works. Your genes load the gun. Your environment, your daily choices pull the trigger. Now, some of us have genetic variations that make us more susceptible to certain issues. We might have detoxification problems. We might have methylation issues. We might have sensitivity to inflammation. But genes, they can be turned on and off. That is called epigenetics. Pause. Some of us have genetic variations that make us more susceptible to certain issues. Detoxification problems, methylation issues, sensitivity to inflammation. But genes, they can be turned on and off. That's called epigenetics. Your lifestyle, your nutrition, your environment, these things affect which genes are expressed. So, phase three is about understanding what you're working with and learning how to work with your body instead of against it. And then phase four, the transformation. This is the piece that directly addresses chronification, your nervous system. After years of chronic pain, your nervous system gets stuck. It learns to expect the pain. It stays on high alert even when there's no threat. This is central sensitization. This is what chronification actually looks like in your brain. And here's the good news. It can be rewired. Your nervous system learned this pattern. It can totally unlearn it, but it takes intentional work. Nervous system regulation, rewiring the pain pathways, teaching your body that it's safe, that it can relax, that it doesn't have to keep sounding the alarm. This is where women who've tried everything finally break through because they're not just reducing inflammation. They're not just addressing the drivers. They're actually changing how their brain responds. So when someone tells you your migraines have become chronified, do not accept that as a life sentence. Do not let that be the end of the conversation. Ask what caused the chronification? What's been driving the inflammation? What are the inducers? What are the chronic drivers? What role are genetics playing? And how do we rewire the nervous system patterns that have been developing? Chronification, it's not a destination. It is a description of where you are right now. And where you are right now is not where you have to stay. So here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. Stop getting hung up on words and labels. Chronification, chronic migraines, intractable, refractory. These words, they describe your situation. They do not define your future. Your brain adapted to dysfunction, and it can adapt back, but not by accepting the label, not by focusing on one piece, not by piecing together random advice from the internet. It takes a systemic approach. It takes a systematic approach, addressing the inducers, then the drivers, then the genetics, then the nervous system, in that order, with support, with guidance. So if you've been told your migraines are chronified and you've accepted that as your fate, I want you to know there's another way. I've worked with women who have had migraines for 30, 40, even 50 years. Women who were told nothing else could be done. Women who had accepted that this was just their life. And they found freedom. Not by accepting the label, by addressing what was actually driving the dysfunction. So if you want to explore what that could look like for you, just book a Migraine Freedom Breakthrough Assessment call. There is zero pressure. It is literally just a real conversation about where you are, what you've tried, and what might actually move the needle for you. Now, the link's in the show notes. Just go click it, find a time, and if you can't, just send me an email and let me know. All right, friend, that is what I have for you today. Do not let a word define your future. Your brain, it can change. Your body can heal. Let's figure out how. Talk to you next week.